Welcome to the weekend edition of the Fear and Greed Business Headlines, the week that was, a wrap of the biggest stories over the past week. I'm Sean Aylmer. It was a week of global politics, COVID good news, surging share markets, and just a touch of negative news for the economy. It was a great week for the ASX 200, which hit new record levels. The rise in the bourse is fairly broad-based. On one day, the banks do well, and then the miners pick up. Towards the end of the week, even the tech stocks and the property companies were doing well, pushing the S&P ASX 200 to a new record. Analysts are now forecasting the market will end the year somewhere between 7,300 points and 8,000 points, which would be the second best annual return in the past decade. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wall Street also hit new records this week as figures showed a pickup in prices, suggesting there's momentum in the world's largest economy. The tech-heavy Nasdaq has also picked up, though it's not back to its April highs. The ongoing debate is whether the pickup in the economy will cause interest rates to rise. The jury at the moment is coming down on the side of no rate rises anytime soon. It was a typical week for digital currencies, tumbling and then surging. One positive surprise, for Bitcoin at least, was the announcement by El Salvador that it will accept it as legal currency. Brent crude had a strong week, rising to new 3-year highs. Crude oil is refined into gasoline and petrol. Around 44% of US oil is used to power vehicles. With the northern summer driving season coming up and people not allowed to fly overseas, there's expectations of surging demand for oil in coming months, and that's pushing prices higher. The Aussie dollar spent the week around 77.5 US cents. The price of gold trundled just below $1,900 an ounce. In international news, the 7 most advanced Western economies have agreed to a new tax regime for multinational companies, including Amazon, Facebook, and Google. All will be forced to pay more tax. The G7 finance ministers agreed on a minimum global corporate tax rate of at least 15%, undermining low taxing jurisdictions to which big multinationals currently shift profits. It should mean the big tech companies pay more tax in Australia. Former US President Donald Trump was banned from Facebook for 2 years for his part in the riots on Capitol Hill in January this year. He's already been banned from Twitter. What a shame. Thousands of websites around the world went offline for about an hour, including several from major news outlets and streaming services, following problems with a Silicon Valley-based internet infrastructure provider. The group, Fastly, operates a content delivery network that helps facilitate faster loading times. It blamed a configuration error, which to me is exactly what software people say when they've got no idea. Some of America's richest people have avoided paying any tax at all, according to investigative journalism group ProPublica. Jeff Bezos, the billionaire founder of Amazon, billionaire fund manager George Soros, Tesla's Elon Musk, and legendary investor Warren Buffett have all dodged the tax man, legally. The annual survey of the world's most livable cities by The Economist magazine was released this week and put Auckland at number 1, then Osaka in Japan, and then Adelaide. I'll say that again. You may not have believed me the first time. Auckland at number 1, Osaka in Japan at number 2, and then Adelaide. Perth, Melbourne and Brisbane also made the top 10. And French President Emmanuel Macron was slapped in the face while on a walkabout in provincial France by a man shouting the slogan, "Down with Macronism." The man was apparently a medieval combat enthusiast, and he's already been sentenced to 4 months jail. Okay, not a big story, but it just makes me giggle. Overall, it was a pretty good week on the COVID front. The outbreak in Victoria did travel to Queensland and potentially New South Wales after a couple drove from the southern state to the Sunshine State while infected. But the fallout seems to have been contained so far. The community-transmitted cases in Victoria fell enough for the acting Premier James Merlino to end the hard lockdown, though some restrictions remain. The federal government said it would provide more vaccinations for Victoria. Globally, the COVID news was also promising. In the US, more than 300 million vaccines have been administered, and the number of new cases and deaths have fallen back to the levels of March 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic. More than 2 billion vaccine jabs have been given globally. In economic news, Australia's AAA rating was confirmed by S&P Global Ratings Agency. That means the federal government and big banks can borrow money cheaper. The concern among ratings agencies was whether the government could repay all the borrowings from COVID-19. S&P is obviously comfortable with the outlook. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg said relative to other countries, including the US and UK, Australia's debt position was strong. Job ads jumped by nearly 8% during May and were close to 40% higher than before the pandemic. According to the ANZ Job Ad Survey, the May labour force data will be released next week, but all signs are that the employment market is doing well. Companies reported booming business conditions and signalled intentions to hire and invest more. The National Australia Bank survey of business conditions hit a record high in May for the second successive month. There's stronger activity across the states and territories and across most industries. And the big employing sectors of construction and manufacturing look to be moving from recovery into expansion mode. It wasn't all good economic news during the week, though. Consumer sentiment tumbled for a second successive month, most recently hit by the lockdown in Victoria. The overall index is still up more than 14% on 12 months ago, when the country was emerging from a round of lockdowns and there were still more optimists than pessimists. But the trend is definitely turning. Consumer confidence is all important to the economy. Happy consumers, they spend money, and that makes the economy go round. In corporate news, financial intelligence regulator AUSTRAC warned 4 listed companies, National Australia Bank and the casinos Crown Resorts, Star Entertainment and Sky City Entertainment, about money laundering through their operations. Some of these allegations date back more than 6 years, the regulator said, but the warning triggered a sell-off in share prices. NAB, particularly given the massive fines previously paid by Westpac and Commonwealth Bank, doesn't want to be stuck with anti-money laundering findings. Mind you, that's the last thing the casinos need at the moment also. The Victorian Royal Commission into Crown Resorts has been continuing. It turned up some pretty shocking allegations during the week. Crown spent $2.5 billion to lure punters, but only $2 million on its problem gamblers program. There was a culture of not complaining to management, not kicking out problem gamblers, and classifying perks as a cost, not in line with accounting standards. There's so much going on that on Friday the commission was extended. The Commissioner, Ray Finkelstein, doesn't seem overly impressed with what he's hearing, and he has the ability to recommend Crown lose its gaming licence in Melbourne, something which, in punter parlance, is still a long shot, though the odds are shortening. Now I get to the point in the program where I go through the biggest story of the week, the sleeper story, the most remarkable story, and my favourite story. The biggest story of the week was what I'm calling all the global stuff. It started with Prime Minister Scott Morrison calling for an overhaul of global trade rules to prevent China's incursion in the world. He talked about the globe approaching a crossroad between liberal democracies and authoritarianism. And it was important that liberal democracies work with the same commitment and common purpose as they did during the Cold War to preserve freedoms. The PM also wanted financing and capital for the Indo-Pacific region, greater cooperation among defence forces and trade partnerships, and safeguarding of supply lines among like-minded countries. This was all ahead of his trip to the G7 in Cornwall, England. That meeting is likely to put multilateralism back on the agenda. The meeting marks a time when countries are starting to work together again, something former US President Donald Trump wasn't a big fan of. It's likely to recommend a boost to the number of vaccines to poorer countries, a push towards more green energy, and statements alluding to the rise of China. While he's there, Mr Morrison was hoping to sign a new free trade deal with the UK, but that seems to have been delayed by concerns among the British agriculture sector. Mr Morrison also popped into Singapore on the way and discussed a travel bubble between Australia and the island nation. The sleeper story of the week was the one about the Australian Medical Association calling for a tax on sugar drinks to help fight diabetes, obesity and poor health. It's not exactly groundbreaking news, but the drums are definitely beating on this issue. More than 2.4 million litres of sugary drinks are consumed every year. That's enough to fill 960 Olympic-sized swimming pools. They have little or no nutritional value, and a tax is needed to disincentivise their consumption, the AMA said. The most remarkable story didn't have much to do with business. Well, it did, but it was all about illegal business. A joint Australian Federal Police FBI investigation seized hundreds of kilograms of drugs and illegal weapons worth $50 million and charged 224 people with more than 525 charges. More than 4,000 police officers were involved in the operation. Alleged offenders included the mafia, motorcycle gangs and Asian criminal syndicates bringing guns and drugs into Australia on an industrial scale. The action shut down 6 clandestine laboratories and 21 threats to kill. including saving one family of 5. It's actually like a movie in our own backyard. Quite remarkable. My favourite story of the week was the appointment of former Western Australia Treasurer Ben Wyatt to the board of Rio Tinto. Mr Wyatt will become Rio's first Indigenous board member. Given how important the Indigenous community is to Australia's big miners and the economy, it really hit me this week how ridiculous it is that the miners don't have people of Aboriginal descent on their boards. There's been a lot of brickbats for Rio over the past year or so, but they deserve a bouquet for this one. I'm cheating in this category because there's a second winner. I love that during the past 10 days, overseas buyers have offered more than $10 billion for different local tech companies. US group Pluralsight paid $2 billion for a cloud guru, an online training startup founded by 2 Melbourne brothers just 5 years ago, focused on cloud computing training programs. European giant Cinch paid $1.7 billion for SMS marketing group Message Media. There's been bids for listed companies Hansen Technologies and Altium. Australia's software and technology industry has come a long way over the past decade. Think about Atlassian worth $77 billion, design group Canva worth $15 billion, and the buy now, pay later groups Afterpay and Zipco that didn't exist 6 years ago and are now worth $29 billion and $4 billion respectively. Aussie tech matches it with the rest of the world. And that's everything you need to know from the last week. I'm Sean Aylmer. I'll be back on Monday morning with the Fear and Greed business headlines. I look forward to your company then.